Tyler, no good yet? Okay, let's dive into some icebreakers delivered by DoorDash. All right, so we have a really interesting rumor or juicy tip that had popped up this week. Lots of chatter around the NHL that Spencer Knight is available from the Florida Panthers. And so wanted to follow up. I've done some due diligence and certainly some homework on this one. And I can say unequivocally that Spencer Knight is not available. Some people might say, hey, that's a little bit, is there even news there? What's going on? Well, the Spencer Knight, obviously a top flight goalie prospect, someone that the Florida Panthers believe in. But the other part of it, I think, and some teams have also done this analysis as well to say, look at where the Florida Panthers are at the moment. They're an authentic Stanley Cup contender, a team that is perhaps one piece away. And could Spencer Knight be used to help get you that piece that exists on the market to help put your team, which is in win now mode, over the top? Well, especially when you have Sergei Bobrovsky for 4 more years at 10 million per. And I can say this, the Florida Panthers have been asked about Spencer Knight and they've been rebuffed. I think where this is emanating from is perhaps a conversation that existed between, I believe, the Florida Panthers and the Arizona Coyotes going back to around the holidays when there were talks between these two teams about defenseman Jacob Chychrun. I believe the Coyotes asked for Spencer Knight and they were rebuffed then. And Spencer Knight, of course, has spent some time in the AHL since then. As you can see, .917 save percentage as he's gotten in 9 starts there in the American Hockey League with the Charlotte Checkers. But the Florida Panthers have no interest in trading Spencer Knight. They believe he's a franchise centerpiece in net. And by the way, just a little nugget there, Spencer Knight is scheduled to come back to the NHL next week. The Florida Panthers, of course, will have some work to do on that front, roster moves wise, in order to get Spencer Knight back to the NHL. And the other part of that story is that, yes, the Arizona Coyotes, probably not a surprise, are looking for a netminder. Karel Vejmelka has been good this season. They've had some extension talks with him. But in terms of potentially trading Jacob Chychrun, they would potentially, depending on the team, be looking for a goaltender back in return. The Boston Bruins have been one of those teams that's expressed interest in Jacob Chychrun. I believe part of the ask from the Arizona Coyotes then was Jeremy Swayman. We'll see what happens there on that front, if Jacob Chychrun ends up moving or not before the deadline. But yes, just to pour some cold water, if the subject comes up again anytime soon, the Florida Panthers view Spencer Knight as a huge part of their franchise moving forward. Okay, so that brings us to the Ottawa Senators. What's going on with Nick Paul? He was the number 13 guy on our trade targets list this week. They had substantive discussions, I think you could say, with Nick Paul and his camp going back to January, had made an offer 3 years times $2 million per year. That's something that is not going to get it done to keep Nick Paul, a guy who's been a big part of what they do, brings certainly a different element as a Swiss Army knife to their team. And discussions have gone pretty quiet of late in the last couple weeks. And so at this point, it's trending towards Nick Paul going to free agency, and certainly would seem, with where the Ottawa Senators are at in their process, trying to get their team to be buyers at the deadline instead of sellers, to use the term that Pierre Dorion has recently. It would appear then that they would have to be entertaining trade offers for Nick Paul ahead of the March 21st deadline. I see Nick Paul as a guy that's definitely somewhere in that $3 million a year range. We'll see if the Ottawa Senators can come closer together to pay Nick Paul to keep him as one of their pieces, certainly for the future as well.
Frank, I'm back. Like, I'm hopping over the boards to rejoin you on a power play. Let's move on to the third name here. The Canes. They were the first team in 14 years with a successful offer sheet on Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Are they going to be able to keep this guy around long term?
Well, they're certainly trying, and I think that I think ultimately they will be successful. You take a look at Kotkaniemi's numbers after a pretty slow start to the season. He's really found his way and found a rhythm. 11 goals, 11 assists for 22 points. And the key with Kotkaniemi is that he's done it with somewhat limited ice time. So they're pretty pleased with the production from Kotkaniemi. He has that qualifying offer at $6.1 million that comes from that offer sheet. Of course, teams and agent and players camp can negotiate below that number. And they've had some recent meetings about this. They've been productive and certainly good spirited. The Carolina Hurricanes would like to get Jesperi Kotkaniemi on as long-term a deal as they can. I don't know if they'll quite get to 8 years, but the prospects are really good for a long-term deal for Jesperi Kotkaniemi to remain in Carolina. My guess, and certainly just hazarding a guess, is somewhere in the $4 to $4.5 million range is the world that they might be talking in. So let's see if the Carolina Hurricanes and Jesperi Kotkaniemi can get a deal done in somewhat short order. He's a guy that they'd like to keep around as part of their future.
Let's head out to the west coast of Canada and the Vancouver Canucks, where a name that maybe we haven't heard a lot about, Tyler Motte. What's the latest around him and the Canucks?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been so much talk about Brock Besser, so much talk about JT Miller, that I think we've kind of lost sight of the one piece that the Vancouver Canucks absolutely have to make a decision on between now and March 21st as their only pending unrestricted free agent. Tyler Motte is someone that you look at his stats here and they're probably a little bit deceiving. Over the last 82 games for Tyler Motte, 13 goals. So there's been some shortened seasons in there. Obviously, there's been some COVID and lots of other things going on. But Tyler Motte is no doubt a big part of the Vancouver Canucks and their energy. He drives that line there in Vancouver and a productive player, also a fan favorite in Vancouver. The question is, does the new regime want to pay Tyler Motte? To this point, they did have an initial meeting, the two sides between Motte's camp and the Vancouver Canucks. There have not been substantive discussions. We're now 17 days away from the NHL trade deadline. And I can say this, if they don't end up coming together, I think there's some sort of structure out there that probably works to help set the marketplace, a Sean Corrali type contract from the Columbus Blue Jackets. I believe that was 2.75 times 4. A deal like that could help set the table for Tyler Motte. Whether or not the Canucks want to pay that type of money to a player that plays in their bottom six and does a lot of different things for them, we'll see what the philosophy is for Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. But at this point, there haven't been really progress made on that front in terms of a contract. It'd be easy to come together and make that happen over the next 17 days. But if not, I can say this for certain. The Vancouver Canucks are not in a position, if Tyler Motte is unsigned before the deadline, to be able to go through that and risk losing him at the end of the year. They've been down that road previously in Vancouver. It's been a sticking point in that market, and it's a mistake that I believe the Canucks will not make this time around. So if we get to March 20th and Tyler Motte is not signed, you can pretty much count on him going somewhere else for a playoff chase.
Fantastic stuff. As always, Frank, another edition of Icebreakers delivered by DoorDash. You see those promo codes at the bottom of the screen, DFODD or DFODDUS, 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order with DoorDash when you use those. It's Friday. You don't want to cook, and the meals on there just as good as the info Frank delivers in Icebreakers.